and I'd like to welcome to the second of our bi-weekly Technomic Talk webinars that discuss areas of interest to suppliers, operators, as well as distributors in the food service industries. Today, we will not be taking questions during this web conference, but please feel free to email me at joepollack@technomic.com. After the webinar, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Today's discussion is going to focus around sustainability and consumer expectations from and of the food service industry. Sustainability is an area that many businesses today embrace, but few have a very true understanding of consumer needs and values in this space. Technomic recently completed a landmark study on sustainability and its role in the food service industry. And the study looked at all dimensions of sustainability, not only from the operator's perspective, but from a supply chain and ultimately the consumer's perspective. And today we're going to spend a few minutes talking about how consumers view sustainability, their expectations, and awareness within a food service context. Please note also that every participant today will receive an executive summary of today's discussion within the next 24 to 48 hours via email. And also, it will be posted on our Technomic.com website. Let's first talk about the consumer sustainability situation. When you talk to consumers about sustainability, the concept evokes a fair amount of confusion, as not all consumers define it similarly. In fact, they're kind of all over the place with the definition and term. Many have heard the word but can't quite put their finger on what it means to them specifically. There really is no common definition. When you start talking about sustainability, they're much more cognizant of the specific factors, whether it be good for the environment, organic, local. Those are things they're more familiar with, but the overarching term sustainability, as I said before, evokes a fair amount of confusion. What we have seen, however, is that a lot of interest and concern is proliferating. Consumers are much more interested in learning about sustainability and what it means for the benefits for not only themselves, but for the overall community, as well as their concern is proliferating as they learn more and more about sustainability and what things sustainability is trying to solve. Now, when you talk about sustainability from a consumer's perspective and you ask them to define sustainability, their vocabulary or their vernacular, their lexicon is very broad. As you'll see, there's a number of the terms that are listed here. Many of them encompass what with the traditional marketer would look at as true sustainability, things like environmentally friendly, global warming concern, local, organic. But also they intermix things that are more aligned with what we would consider to be social responsibility factors, and even things that are better for you when you start talking about better for you eating, as an example, or healthy. So when you look from an overall perspective, you see that consumers really encompass not only sustainability from a true definitional standpoint, but also social responsibility and better for you eating in their terms of sustainability. And that's how kind of we'll go through the presentation today, talk about all these different terms because this is how the consumers talk about it. It's also important to remember that for individual consumers, their definition is strongly associated with what is important to them today or what they practice. So for example, if they're practicing recycling at home, sustainability encompasses recycling, or if they're into conservation, or if they're into healthy eating. Again, these are all terms that are used and in their own ways and their own values are ones that help them define what they mean by sustainability. And then again, I want to reiterate that sustainability is intertwined with social responsibility, environmentally friendliness, as well as healthy eating and better for you eating. These are all, again, from a consumer's perspective. We gave consumers about 40 different factors to evaluate in terms of how important each of these are to them personally. And if you look at the top 3 on this list, you'll see humane working conditions, ensuring that products and ingredients are safe from the foods, beverages they purchase and consume. And then thirdly, it's health and wellness. And if you look at those three, those truly aren't in a more technical definition of sustainability, not sustainability issues. They're more dealing with social responsibility. But again, from a consumer's perspective, those are sustainability issues. Others that are in the top tier, you would find those that are things such as equal rights, quality work environment, reduction of pollution also come up to the top tier. And then on the lower tier, organic and natural, no overfishing, and climate change. However, keep in mind, even in that lower tier of all 40 of the factors that we looked at, they had at least 50% of consumers that were at least somewhat concerned with those issues or were included in their definition. So it's very important to keep that in mind that, even though they're in the lower tier, they still are important to the consumer. And each of the factors we looked at did have impact on how they view restaurants today. How restaurants are viewed as performing on each of these factors help them being viewed in terms of how well their sustainability record is perceived by the consumer. Now, we also ask consumers how concerned are they about the different factors. And again, we break out environmental issues and social responsibility issues from the broader sustainability issues. And you see very much so 80% and above are concerned with all three of those issues. Then we ask what percentage, then we ask consumers how well is the food service industry addressing these, or how well are they properly addressing each of these issues. And you can see that's much lower. For example, only 24% of consumers believe the food service industry is adequately addressing environmental issues, only 31% on the social responsibility issues, and then 28% on the sustainability issues. So from a consumer's perspective, the restaurant and food service industry still has a way to go to address the issues that are in front of them related to sustainability. Now, we also ask consumers about the information they're getting or how they view information related to sustainability. And we're finding a number of different factors that are coming into play. The first question we ask, I don't know which specific restaurants or food service venues are committed. I think the key word here is committed to social responsibility or sustainability issues. 62% of consumers agree with that statement. It basically tells us that most consumers are not fully aware of this sustainability commitment that individual restaurants have. If you go down to the third bullet, it says, I am more aware of the social responsibility and sustainability policies of individual restaurants today than I was 2 years ago. That's at 54%, meaning they're much more aware of it, but again, not from a total commitment perspective. It's more some of the individual initiatives that restaurants are putting into place to be more sustainable or more social responsible or environmentally friendly. I want food service venues to publicize their social responsibility initiatives more aggressively. 60% of consumers agree with that statement, basically telling us they want more information, more transparency. Again, that is very aligned with the trends that we're seeing where consumers want more information about what's going on in the marketplace overall with the foods they eat. So again, very much in tune to other things we're seeing. And then the last point, there is not a food service company that I believe is best in class with regards to sustainability. Over half said that. That's a very important point. And we saw that before that, from a consumer's perspective, the food service industry does not appear to be meeting expectations with regard to meeting the sustainability challenges. Now, we asked consumers what role do a number of different factors come into play when they're deciding on which food service venues to visit. And not surprising, when you ask consumers about these factors, the more traditional, long-standing factors are still primary, such as the venue is able to give us good value, the venue is clean, it offers high-quality food and beverage, and it's conveniently located. Not surprising, they're at the top end of the hierarchy, with over 65% of consumers indicating that they are top factors for them. When you look at the sustainability issues, they tend to fall down farther down the list. Just because a restaurant exhibits sustainability initiatives and practices doesn't give that restaurant any advantage unless the expectations are met on those primary factors of good value, consistently clean, etc. Now, I'd like to point out a quote from one consumer that really talks to this point during our research. I would like to visit restaurants that are environmentally friendly, but only if the food is good. I will not go somewhere just because they have green packaging, but then their food tastes bad. That's not a good decision. However, if all things are equal, on those primary factors, consumers appear to prefer a restaurant that exhibits green characteristics than those that don't. And you can see here, when given a choice of a green versus a non-green option in a restaurant, 86% of consumers said that they're at least somewhat likely to choose the green restaurant, with about a third of them saying they're very likely to do so. And not surprising, there's a higher likelihood when you look at the data. Millennials tend to over-index on the likelihood, meaning that, again, that they're much more strongly aligned with saying that their preference is stronger for a green restaurant than some of the other groups. However, and always the question is, if I'm installing or I'm getting involved in sustainability or green initiatives, is the customer willing to pay more? And based on the data that we received, few are willing to pay more for green restaurant initiatives. You see that only 31% of consumers said that they are willing to pay more. 34% said outright no and no. And then 35% weren't quite sure or need more information to be able to make that decisions. In fact, many consumers believe that a restaurant will in fact save on cost by being green, whether it be through less waste, more energy efficiency. Have another quote here from a consumer during our focus groups. In my opinion, items should actually cost less by being sourced locally, and this cost savings should be passed on to the consumer. Again, not surprisingly, when we look at the younger age group, the millennials, for example, those that fall between 25 and 34, 45% said they're willing to pay more or pay a premium for a green restaurant, whereas older groups, the 55 and above, only 21% said they were willing to pay more. Another key component that many in our industry that's very relevant to the food service industry is this whole idea of local sourcing. And when you look at local sourcing, it has really two dimensions. The first dimension deals with distance, or the distance from the source. And we asked consumers to indicate to us how far away, within what radius does a product need to come from to be considered local. And as you see here, 31% of consumers say that it has to be within 50 miles. Another 17% said it has to be within 150 miles. 18% say within my community. 22% says the product has to come from within my state, and within my region, and within the U.S. If you look at within my city and my community, millennials tend to over-index on this number. That much more is their definition of what is local. It's a community or city initiative rather than something that's more defined from a mileage perspective. Now, there's also another dimension, and there's other definitions that come into play, whether it be, which is the highest on this list, delivered directly by the farmer, supplier, or producer. That being defined as local. 65% believe that's local. From a family-owned operation, 48%. From a small farmer, supplier, producer, not necessarily has any distance directive around it, 42%. And then 28% saying an organic product. And that one, not surprising, again, the millennials tend to believe that more strongly than other groups. So the thing to keep in mind here is there's no common thought or one common definition of local, just as there's not one common definition of sustainable from a consumer's perspective. When we ask consumers where they would expect to see sustainable menus, it very much aligns very closely with the with the sophistication and the upscale nature of a restaurant. So as you become more sophisticated and more upscale, the expectation that sustainable menus will be available is much higher. So for example, 65% of consumers expect to see sustainable menus within the fine dining restaurant in the area. 63% say within the local sit-down restaurants, 57% say within sit-down chain restaurants, and so on and so forth. Interesting, when you peel back the data again, lower income groups tend to expect to see sustainable menus across all segments. And if you go back looking at some of the data and how they define sustainability, a lot of their definition of sustainability surrounds around living wage, equal rights, those more corporate responsibility issues. So by them expecting to see sustainability in all these venues makes sense. So in terms of a conclusion and key takeaways, obviously sustainability has many dimensions. It's not just about the traditional academic way we look at sustainability, but also includes things like consumer social responsibility, healthy eating, better for you, environmentally friendliness. And the way a consumer defines sustainability typically is aligned with how they view or what values they have or what they're practicing internally in their own lives. Sustainability concern is high, but the industry is not seen as addressing it properly. Although it's not a primary driver, sustainability does play a role in venue selection. All things equal in terms of quality, price, value, when they're comparing 2 or 3 different venues, then the default becomes sustainability and how well an individual operation or restaurant is performing on expectations on sustainability from a consumer's perspective. And then we look at green and local sourcing. Those are the highest on the list of consumer, from a consumer's perspective with regard to food service expectations. Those are the key things that they look for when they think about food service. Talk about green, you think about things such as water savings or environmentally friendly packaging, less waste, and then local sourcing, supporting the local businesses, having products that are grown without fertilizers and antibiotics. Those type of things are very high on the list from a consumer's perspective. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me this morning. I just wanted to make you aware of our upcoming webinars. The next one, 2 Tuesdays from today on April 1st, sustainability, and this is going to be taken from a food service operator's perspective. Within our omnibus study on sustainability, we looked at both consumer and operator, and this will talk a little bit about how the food service operator is viewing sustainability and what they're doing from an initiative perspective. On April 15th, we'll be talking about updating the impact of the power to food service distributors. These are the major broadline distributors, and talking about how they're changing and how that atmosphere is changing overall. On April 29th, we'll be looking at independent restaurants in the state of the street. And then finally is the last webinar for this series of Technomic Talks is the battle for share, talking about supermarket prepared foods versus restaurants. As a reminder, you will all receive an email with an executive summary of today's discussion. My email for any questions is at jpaulak@technomic.com. Thank you very much for attending this morning. Appreciate your time and have a great day. Thank you.